Welcome to the Stranger Conversations podcast, where we explore the lives and lessons of those around us, hidden in plain sight. I'm your host, Tay Jones. Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the Stranger Conversations podcast. In today's episode, I speak with Amanda Gow, owner of Bendable Therapy in Bend, Oregon. Bendable Therapy provides modern, clinical-proven mental health services specializing in psychedelic-assisted therapy, allowing participants to safely explore the therapeutic benefits of psilocybin, aka hallucinogenic mushrooms. As always, before we dive into today's conversation, I want to encourage you to sign up to be my next guest. Every episode belongs to my guest, and you're welcome to talk about or promote anything you'd like. Visit strangerconversationspodcast.com or realtayjones.com/podcast. Find a date and time that work for you on our calendar, and we'll connect to hit record on your life. If being a guest on the show doesn't sound right for you, but you know someone who has an amazing life to share and would be interested, encourage them to sign up. I'd love to talk with them. All past and future episodes of the show are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, as well as my website. Don't forget to like, follow, share, and subscribe to the Stranger Conversations podcast so you don't miss out on the conversations to come. And be sure to follow me on social media at Real Tay Jones on most platforms. Links to me and the podcast, as well as links to connect further with Amanda and Bendable Therapy, are located in this episode's show notes. Now, let's hear my conversation with Amanda Gow.
Hello.
Hey, Amanda.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I thought we were going to play phone tag for a couple of minutes there.
Yeah, no worries. I was just going to text you, and then I saw you were calling me back, so perfect.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, well,
It's nice to be connected. I love that Sarah connected us.
Yeah, I know. She's the great connector, it seems.
My gosh, isn't that the truth?
Yeah, she knows just about everybody, and she knows a lot of interesting people, which makes it great, which makes it great for me.
Well, I must say that woman is quite interesting herself, so.
Yep. I'm actually, I was talking with her the other day, and she will actually probably come on the podcast. I know she's not a stranger to me, but there's we don't spend a lot of time together, and there's a lot of things that have happened in her life recently, so I think it'd be good to sit down and have a chat with her, see
Absolutely.
what's all new in her life.
I love that. Yep, she's definitely had a lot going on those last couple of years, and then you added that all of her Survivor stuff. I mean, always interesting.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, well, I'm glad she connected us, and I'm really excited about our conversation, and what this podcast is all about. It's just about getting to know somebody that I don't know, but getting to learn a lot of the things that just kind of that not so average people that walk among us, what they do in their life, kind of where they began, where they're at now, kind of what led them down those paths, and any lessons they learned along the way. So, yeah, really looking forward to getting to know you a little bit, and really excited about the work that you're doing, and I'm sure we're going to dive all into it, but in kind of that psychedelic therapy realm. So I'm very, very excited about that. I know it's not exactly fringe anymore like it may have used to have been 5-10 years ago. It's definitely more mainstream, and it seems to be helping a lot of people. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Asked me if 18-year-old Amanda could see 44-year-old Amanda, she'd be like, wait, what is your job?
Yeah, and that's kind of part of it is I'm really curious what would bring you into that, that work. And so maybe let's start there. Like, where did you grow up?
Okay. I grew up in Bend, Oregon, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you've been there quite a bit then.
Yep. Born and raised in Bend, Oregon, left after high school, like you do with, my bags packed and the idea that I was never coming back. Right. But then, over the years, I came back to Bend in my mid 20s. And then, didn't necessarily expect to stay for the duration, but that is the way things worked out. And I couldn't be happier. Like Bend is a great place to call home.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
where did you leave when you left Bend?
Yeah, so I went to school at U of O. And then after, graduation, I worked out of Chicago for a while. I spent a year in Italy, and then also did a bunch of like dirt bag backpacking around Eastern Europe in my 20s as well. So,
Awesome. Love it.
got to explore all sorts of different parts of the world, and there's just no place like home. Like Bend, Oregon really is just such a beautiful area. And then for a while, the job that I had, which we can like talk about the trajectory of how I ended up where I'm at, but I was working for a lot of national agencies. So I was like working all over the place. So able to go and visit and get out of Bend quite regularly for my work stuff. And so I got to spend like chunks of time, like sometimes 3 to 6 weeks in different major cities like Boston and Houston and just all over the United States. So I got a good taste of like the life around the country, and just there's no place like home. Just kept clicking those ruby slippers together and taking me back here.
I guess it was fate that brought you back.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that, and I haven't been back to my hometown in quite some time. But I'm planning on going back in a few years, which would be nice. So yeah, I think I'm already a little bit homesick from it. So when I go back, it's gonna be one of those. Ooh, do I really want to leave?
Yeah.
It'll feel like home, like it always does.
Yeah.
Yeah, so traveling around, I mean, that's great. I traveled all over the place when I was younger, just to really see a lot of, the different country. I mean, America is so vast and there's lots of different cultures within the country. And, so it's great to kind of explore that. You kind of see a little bit of everything here because of
Yeah.
the greatness, how big America is.
Absolutely.
What sort of work were you doing when you were traveling all over the place?
Yeah, so fresh out of college, so like my undergraduate degree was in business finance, and so fresh out of college, I was working for this company called ADM, which is based out of Chicago, and it's a futures and options. Well, it does a lot of trading, but I was working in the futures and options trading center for corn, wheat, and soybeans, which is just so random.
Yeah.
So I worked in those markets, which was really interesting. Interesting experience, and just really quickly realized that like this kind of like high finance cutthroat like industry just wasn't for me. It didn't really, I don't know, it didn't fill my heart with a lot of joy. And I wanted to do something different. So I pretty quickly left like the world of finance, waving goodbye to large amounts of money. I'm sure in my future
Yeah.
to change my direction to work in service of nonprofits. So um, I kind of like used my finance degree to help, to then work in nonprofits. So like using that business acumen and like all of the skills and knowledge and my deep, deep love of a spreadsheet to help do nonprofit management. So I worked for an organization called J Youth Services for a long time, about a decade. And then under them, there was an umbrella of a lot of agencies. So it was a large youth serving agency. And I worked on their leadership team and kind of oversaw their community-based programs. So which were transitional living programs for teens experiencing homelessness, a street outreach program, again, for teens who were experiencing homelessness. I also ran the Big Brothers Big Sisters organization. I, through that process, became a big sister. My little sister is turning or just turned 22 in February.
Oh, wow.
We were matched when she was 9. So that program was really near and dear to my heart. And then after that, I was the executive director for a Boys and Girls Club. And then before I transitioned to the career I'm in now, my last job I was working for an organization that did counter human trafficking, so minor domestic victims. So,
Okay.
and two sides of that job, I was like doing business development and then also working in direct service with people who had experienced trafficking and working to get them connected to resources and support and shelters around the country.
Yeah. And was that all based out of Bend though when you were?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. All of it was based out of Bend, but again, like since they were such like some of them were such large organizations, I would often travel to other places. I was like in DC a lot doing like advocacy and policy work, and then when I was with Big Brothers Big Sisters, I also sat on their national leadership board. So we would, often be in different areas of the country, working with programs and doing different things. So I got to like experience and like what you were talking about, I totally relate to of, you start to realize how many cultures there are in the United States. And like, it was really kind of like through those different jobs and like the travel that I did around the country and like oftentimes into like the more rural parts of the country, and middle of the country where I was like, oh, I really am from the Pacific Northwest. Like I didn't realize how much I like relate to our value systems and culture here. But like when you're taken out of it, you're like, oh yeah, like I really am a Pacific Northwest hippie. Like I get it.
Yeah, yeah. And when you were in the finance world, I mean, you said you kind of leaving the, money potential behind. Was it something
Yeah.
that you had already had experienced some of the money, or was it still a few years out for you before you?
Oh yeah. I was still at the very beginning of that phase, so I never was making the big bucks, but like I definitely got to, experience some really cool things of like, again, like I know a lot about crops.
Hmm.
So that's like always a surprise for people. And they're like, why do you know so much about farming? I'm like, oh, I worked with farmers because I worked with a lot of like soybean farmers and like, corn and wheat and, just, farmers from the middle of the country. And so I would spend a lot of time on the phone with them talking about crop reports and soil and like trying to decide like, how, what the market was going to look like. And, so I was like, it's really fascinating. So I still decide to have this like funny set of information in my mind about random farming practices.
Yeah, you have got the eclectic experience,
Yeah.
with everything. Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, with all the things that you've done, I mean, I mean, it sounds like a lot of it was with youth in human trafficking with youth.
Yeah.
Is that kind of where your passion was, or maybe still is,
Um,
or is it just something that you just kind of fell into that niche and it fit for you?
yeah, it really at the time the youth services was such a huge part of my life. And like, I growing up, like I benefited so much from like the community support that came around me. Like I was raised by a single dad. He was 23 when I was born. And my mom had a lot of mental health issues. Like she left for the first time when I was 6 months old. And then
Mm.
like just throughout my life, like definitely caused a fair amount of like distress. And my dad's like the world's most amazing person and like just such a solid rock. But like he was also young and doing the best that he could. He had to work full time. And I grew up in this small community where like, my sports teams, my neighbors, my after school programs, and like people just really poured into me and gave me, I'm like so thankful for all that support that was offered to me because I don't know exactly where my life would have turned out if I wouldn't have had some pretty incredible like mentors, teachers, and again, community members in my life. And like, so I felt really dedicated and called for a long time to just like give back to other kids who maybe were experiencing similar things to me. So like Big Brothers Big Sisters, Boys and Girls Clubs, like these programs really meant a lot to me. And then just through my work with like youth and advocacy, that did lead me to the opportunity to work in a much different area, not necessarily like the after school programs and support systems, but truly working in like this, the anti-human trafficking space, which was definitely a shift for me. When I was with JBRJ, I was part of the team that helped like get a grant to set up a local shelter here for teens to experience or who had experienced trafficking. So I had started to get into that space just through my work with my different youth serving agencies. And so it led me there. But yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's, I guess, a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, you definitely got, it sounds like an opportunity to kind of pay it forward a little bit there, and
Yeah.
make some difference. Make a difference in at least a few people's lives, which is always great.
Yeah.
And you're really connected with that woman now that we're the big sister for. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And is your
Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
Oh, I said, yeah, she's actually graduating from college this year. So
Wow, that's
it's
great.
been really just such a gift to be a part of her life and to be a small piece of her story. So
Yeah. And do you have children?
I do. So that's actually like how this whole pivot came about.
Okay.
So and I mean, like, it was kind of like a cascading like series of events. But um, at the beginning of the pandemic, like when that pandemic started, it really shifted my other job, like this job that I was working with the human trafficking, because I was pretty busy at that time. I was like traveling all over the country pretty regularly. I was gone about a week out of every month,
Mm.
like different places. I was based out of Bensville, but I was gone a lot, like working on different projects. And then the pandemic happened, which just like halted all travel. And like I found myself in my kitchen, like on Zoom meetings and like doing something different. And like, but it also like allowed me this like time and space to slow down. And I, my now husband, but we were, still just dating back then, but it like allowed us, we were both, he's an attorney and he has like a crazy, he's a trial attorney. So he's got like a crazy schedule as well. But like that pandemic like allowed us the space to like slow down. We went on this like incredibly magical backpacking trip in Yosemite and like just had this wonderful conversation and kind of decided that we wanted to really grow our relationship and our family. And it
Yeah.
was really important for him to be a dad. And I mean, to be perfectly honest, I was a little bit on the fence. My own relationship with my own mother kind of gave me a lot of hesitancy around, is that something I wanted to pursue my own motherhood journey? But I just like feel like through his love and support and, just belief in us,
Right.
like we did decide to move forward and become parents. And so I gave birth to my daughter Alice when I was 40, and she was my 40th birthday present. And
Wow.
she's literally the best thing that ever happened to me. Like I can't imagine my life without her. And just like being a mother is like the greatest gift I've ever received. I don't know. I feel like I'm one of those people that like I truly love being a mother. And I know that's not necessarily always the case for everyone. And I feel very fortunate though to be where I'm at. And yeah. So, but through that, like when she was born, I was like, well, I'm not going back to my old job because I really started to feel differently about the work that I had done before, like working with youth, especially youth who experienced really high trauma. Previous to being, a mother, I felt like I could hold that work differently,
Mm-hmm.
and that like I felt like I had a higher capacity to like to do that work. And like becoming a mother, I just felt differently, and I was like, I can't go back to that space again. And I'm grateful for the years of service that I got to dedicate for that, but I just knew it was time for a change. And so I was like, I took a full year off with my daughter.
Okay.
And at that time, like Measure 109, which is the measure that passed in Oregon that allowed for regulated psilocybin services. And I was watching this unfold. My husband's also very involved with politics, as am I. Like I had mentioned before, like I've done a lot of advocacy work for kids, and he does a lot of advocacy and work as well. And Oregon's a small state. Like if you're involved in politics, like you just are kind of like in the mix, I
Yeah.
think. So I was like watching this happen, and I was like really interested in it because I really believe, and I mean, we can talk about that as well. Like I really believe in the healing power of psychedelics, and I've experienced that healing myself. I've definitely had friends and colleagues who have experienced that. Again, like in the human trafficking agency I was working with, it was veteran owned and operated. And so I was the only civilian on the team. Like everyone else had military service. And I was watching what was happening with veterans and then sharing their stories about how psychedelics they're like changing their lives as well. And then working with veterans who, on my team were losing friends all the time to
Mm-hmm.
suicide. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, I'm so into this. And so I told my husband, I was like, I think I know what I want to do is I'm going to go back to graduate school when Alice turns 1, and I'm going to become a therapist. And on, throughout my, 15 years of career in nonprofits, I had often supervised mental health professionals.
Mm-hmm.
They'd been on my team, and I was like, you know what, like, I think is what I could do in this next phase of life is like I can become a therapist and I can work with people for like preparation and integration of psychedelic experiences, because I kind of saw the way Oregon was going, and I was like, oh, there's going to be like this gap between the psilocybin services and the mental health aspect of it.
Yeah.
And I'm an entrepreneur by nature too, so I was like the kid in 5th grade who was like starting businesses, so like
I
this
love
has
it.
always kind of been my thing. And so I was like, okay, that's what I want to do. Alice is going to turn 1. I'm going to go back to graduate school. So I did that, I moved forward with that plan, and then just like pretty quickly into the process of becoming, in my training of my clinical mental health degree and watching the Oregon model, I just realized that there was this huge gap between mental health, what really these psilocybin compounds can be helpful for, and the Oregon model, because the Oregon model really is like adult supported use. The Oregon law didn't really, it was not intended to be a mental health journey. And then I also was like realizing pretty quickly that like, oh, bringing this into the regulated market is going to be expensive, appropriately so, but it's going to be expensive.
Yeah.
And I was just like watching these veterans who were like pouring their hearts out to try to pass this measure. And I was like, we're just going to leave all of the people I've ever worked with and for at the finish line. Like this measure is going to pass and they're not going to have access to services because it's going to be out of reach financially.
Right.
And that just broke my heart. And then I was like looking around and I was like, well, somebody's got to do something about that. And then I was looking around and I was like, I think that person's going to be me.
That's right. Enter Amanda.
Yeah, enter Amanda. Oh my God, I can't keep my nose out of anything. And I like remember turning to my husband and I was like, so therapist, I was like, but I think is what I want to do is like, maybe just like start like a little nonprofit. And he was like, he literally, and I quote, he was like, I cannot wait to see how this gets away from you. And I was like, oh man, he knows me so well. He's my number one fan and champion. Like he just is so supportive and amazing. So like, he was just like, yeah, I mean, of course you're going to do this small little nonprofit. And then that quickly kind of grew and to be like, okay, we're a nonprofit that on one side is a mental health agency that, does, classic, mental health things and is a fundraising arm and has scholarships for folks and does advocacy and, trainings and education for other mental health professionals. And then I pretty quickly realized, okay, well, I can provide scholarships for people, but like, where are they going to go have these services
right.
that is like trauma informed and therapeutically aligned and like is held and supported by, dually licensed facilitators who are also mental health professionals. And then I looked around again. I was like, oh, that doesn't exist. So I should probably start a service center. So that's how we ended up with, and I started and founded the company with one of my best friends who he is just an incredible person. And but he's an engineer by trade.
Okay. And
he works in highly regulated markets. So like, man, I love spreadsheets, but this man takes it to the next level. So like when it comes to operations, he's just been such a fantastic business partner. And then so the two of us together, we're a pretty dynamic duo. But now we have like the two agencies, the nonprofit and the service center. So that and we have a team of folks who work with us and as facilitators who are also duly licensed as mental health professionals. And then we also, because again, I can't stop myself, pretty quickly at the beginning of this whole process too, when we started the service center, I was like, what we really need is research, right? Of like, what is the efficacy behind this new, like, psilocybin outside of clinical trials? So we also filed the first formally filed field research project, went through the whole process of being like IRB review and like becoming the first ever field research site.
Wow.
And we just finished. We finished data collection March 30th and are now currently in data analysis. So hopefully we'll be like announcing the results from this research project.
That's great.
In June. Yeah.
Wow. So
I'll take a breath now.
Hey, no worries. That's awesome setup. And it sounds like you're doing some amazing groundbreaking work. But my question, so you work with a lot of veterans and, they're losing people to suicide and they've got a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
And then you think, okay, well, I'll just go to graduate school and be a therapist because there's something missing. Had you already tried psychedelics? What was your experience like before that? Did you say, if I'm going to do this, I should try it first? Or is it something that you've been doing your whole life?
Yeah, that's a great question. So and it's interesting. So, I mean, I think there's people who like consider themselves to be psychonauts and like, I wouldn't necessarily put myself in that category. And I don't know exactly what qualifies somebody to call themselves a psychonaut, but I don't know that I'm there. But yeah, I have had a long history with psychedelics. I would say infrequent, but impactful.
Okay.
So, I mean, like, I do strongly believe in plant medicine, and I also do strongly believe in doing the work outside of plant medicine. Like, it can't, it is
Hmm.
not the answer, right? It is a tool and a vehicle to help us understand ourselves, to process things, and it's got amazing properties and qualities that can help enhance, um, and help us heal and enhance ourselves. However, like, it isn't the work. You still have to do the work. So that's why I always say, like, I am a I have a long history with psychedelics, but infrequent but impactful. So
Okay.
my first psychedelic experience was at 18. And like, it's so funny because I was like a straight A kid, choir, ran cross country, never
Yeah.
drank, never did anything. And then it's just like so funny. But I went on a college visit to U of O, of course, like, right. And like, one of my friend's older sisters was there, and like, they were like, do you want to try LSD? And I don't know why I said yes. I'm like, was not that kid. I was like a dare graduate. I took it serious. Like, but I don't know. It's just like one of those things. And it was a really, really awful night, honestly. So it was super scary.
You said
And
You said LSD.
oh yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, and
I
that's
went big, go big or go home.
well, and that's one thing I wanted to ask you, because you had just said
Yeah.
plant medicine,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you continue with the story too, but I kind of
Right.
curious, like mushrooms, they grow in the
Yeah.
wild, that is very,
Right.
plant medicine.
Right.
Potentially like ayahuasca, that stuff, it's
Yeah.
multiple plant medicines kind of mixed together. What
Yeah.
LSD is more of a chemical, right? That's not something that's
Totally.
naturally available
Totally.
in the world. So
Right.
I'm also curious, kind of what's the difference between those, and do they have, is LSD actually, is there some benefits to that, or is it just kind of bad for you when there's other
No, no,
things
no.
available for you?
Yeah, no. And I mean, like, LSD isn't legal, of course, there's no regulated path towards that. So, but I mean, it is a classic psychedelic, and there's a lot, like, before research was shut down, it was showing great promise, similar to psilocybin. So, like, so it's still considered a classic psychedelic. And so, if LSD was available, it would be something that we would have more
Gotcha.
conversations with our clients about. But, and for me, that just happened to be the first like psychedelic I was introduced to.
Hmm.
And yeah, and that night was not great. But again, like, this is the one thing that I now know about psychedelics that is so important, is set and setting.
Hmm.
And I did not know or pay attention to either of those. I was in the wrong mindset, and I definitely wasn't in the right setting, which is just a recipe for disaster. And I now can like look back and be like, I set myself up for failure. But in the moment, like, it was where we were at, and I found myself in a stairwell at the U of O dorms, basically just crying and processing childhood trauma. And I like to call that now, like, when people tell me these stories, I like, accidental therapy. Yep, been there.
That's a
So,
good term.
but I came, yeah, accidental therapy. But I came out of that, um, actually with a huge change in my perception around some different traumatic events from my childhood, and I was able to carry it differently. And I was luckily, I was like, at that time also, seeing a therapist. You know, she was my childhood therapist. She was great, and she was super helpful and in processing that. And again, is a big believer in doing this in conjunction with like supportive mental health professionals. She of course didn't know that that's what I was going to do on my college visit, but she was willing to like work with me afterwards, which was very gracious of her. But yeah, but that moment, like, it changed my life. Like, I remember thinking, I was like, oh, there's something here. I don't exactly know what happened, but like, that dramatically shifted how I held that trauma in my body. And we
Yeah.
know a lot more now. There's a lot of like books and studies. The Body Keeps the Score is like such a popular book about trauma, about how trauma gets stored in the body. And so now, knowing what I know now about, all of the skills and education that I have, I can definitely see what was going on.
Hmm.
But for me at 18, I was just like, oh, all I know is that, like, I don't feel this in my body the same way that I once did.
Yeah.
And it really allowed me, a lot of growth. And then and so like that just kind of like started me on a lifelong interest. And a lot of my learning then came through like books and podcasts and like listening and just being aware of things. And then as I got older, I did have I went on an actual like therapeutic intentional ayahuasca journey that
Mm-hmm.
again, like really, really transformed my life. Um, and brought me to a more healed version of myself and allowed me a lot of deep insight. And ultimately is I credit that ayahuasca experience for the eventual birth of my daughter. He's like in that journey, I really saw for the first time that like I wasn't my mother. And I know that
Yeah.
may not make sense to you. Like cognitively, I knew that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know that. And it really allowed me to like see myself and it allowed me to recognize too that my choice to not have children was based out of fear, not love. And that in that journey, I was able to see that I didn't want fear to hold me back from something. And so, I am
Yeah.
so thankful for that journey because when it did come time and I found the right person, like I was able to like face that fear and move forward. And as I said, like it brings tears to my eyes just thinking about it, is that my daughter is the greatest gift I've ever been given.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I heard
chokes me
a,
up.
oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, kids will change you. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I heard a quote once. It's exact, and obviously you hear a quote and it kind of, oh, that's really good. But exactly
Mm-hmm.
what you just said fits this quote perfect. But it was past hurt informs future fear. So kind of
Yes.
what you were thinking, you know you're not your mother, but
Yeah.
you had that fear and you kind of had to separate yourself from that and kind of move forward. And it's yeah, that exactly fits that quote. That's great.
And that is exactly it. And it was so then through that, like so that those are kind of my relationship. And then I'm a part of the Burning Man community. I have volunteered with Zendo, which is the mental health like arm of Burning Man. So I've definitely like been around the psychedelics, I would say, and like that recreational way and like
Mm-hmm.
supporting folks who maybe had been on those recreational journeys and were ending up in an accidental therapy spot, like,
Mm-hmm.
so, just through that, like I was very like aware of, I was personally aware of the healing power of psychedelics, but I also like saw it in my communities as well, of people who are accessing this. And, and again, like I'm a huge nerd. So like, I was like, I'm going to read all the books, listen to all the podcasts. So, I mean, now it's like so interesting because it's like
Yeah.
so mainstream, I feel like, and there's so much information, but back then you really had to kind of search for it. But there's so many wonderful books that have been written, by folks about these, about psilocybin and LSD, and MDMA and, you know, a lot of these like compounds have been written about and studied in some way before, the federal government villainized them, which
Yeah.
is always interesting. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And you were, the accidental therapy. Um,
yeah,
and you're young. So I mean, when you're young,
right,
it's really difficult to process your emotions, right? You're not quite there yet.
yeah,
Would
right.
you say people should wait until they're a little bit
Oh,
older to experience this?
100%.
Okay. Yeah, because I feel like you
Yeah,
could really, unless you had some sort of guide, right? You
yeah,
really wouldn't know what you're experiencing, and you could probably, potentially do more harm than good. I don't know.
absolutely.
I've actually never done it myself, but I've been around a lot of
Yeah,
people that have done it.
yeah,
And I see, when you say the set and setting, when we were in
yeah,
high school and people would do mushrooms, and they would have a shroom buddy. That's what, like,
yeah,
they would have somebody with them to kind of level set them and just kind
yeah.
of keep them there. And so I guess that's kind of what you're doing. You're a professional
Yeah.
shroom buddy. Not
That's my new title.
there you go. Not to down, degrade what you're doing, but that's what I kind of think about that because if you just do it and you're by
Yeah,
yourself and you don't have a way to really go through it or somebody to kind of guide you through that, then I could see how you could get off track. Um,
yeah,
the the other thing too, when I watched in high school, and this was like you said, you're kind of you're processing everything. I remember
yeah.
two of my friends, they had taken mushrooms and I mean, I am not kidding. I'm sure you probably see this all the time. They had an entire conversation with each other and they never said a word.
Oh,
You
yeah,
know what I mean? They were
yeah,
just connected with the
yeah.
souls. And kind of ever since that day, I've always wondered, when you're doing psychedelics, are you kind of stepping out of yourself or are you stepping deeper inside yourself? I don't know. Is
Mm,
that like
yeah.
where would you think on that?
So that's a really curious question. I do want to note too when you said like, would you recommend this for, no. I mean, even now, like everything that I know about brain development and all of the different things that I've learned, I highly recommend that people wait until at least 25. When
Okay.
the brain is more fully formed and you're able to make meaning of that. And in Oregon, it's legal for 21 and over, but at our clinic, it is 25 and older. We do accept some. We have had a couple of clients who've come in, a little bit younger than that, but that was very much on a case by case basis. So that's kind of where I'm at now. And then, yeah, so I think like stepping inside or outside of sometimes like the the work of psilocybin is the deep work of the subconscious. So it is going inward. It is, and these therapeutic journeys specifically are designed to be this inward exploration. I always tell people that like as a facilitator, like I'm ground control and you're a space explorer of the subconscious. Like I'm
Okay.
going to keep you safe. I have the tools, I have the resources. Like, and if you get into a tricky situation, I'm going to help you through it. I'm never going to help you around it because like oftentimes the challenge is what we came for, and like what we find challenging is what we needed to work through, but I'm going to keep you safe and grounded during that process. So like my job is to really lock into you and like really be in that grounded, calm space to be able to hold this container for us so that you can have whatever experience you need to have. And so people are really going inward. However, like the interesting piece about like there's, therapeutic journeys and recreational journeys are different. Sometimes I like to tell people that like, a recreational experience is like being in a hot tub with friends, and a therapeutic journey is like rafting the Grand Canyon. Like they both involve water, but they're very different things,
Yeah.
and so sometimes like is what we do know like with the psychedelic with psilocybin experiences in those recreational or therapeutic spaces, there is a big energy exchange, so like
Hmm.
when people report these things like, oh, we had this full conversation, it's like, right, like we just don't fully understand how like energy transfer works, but like we're all aware of it, like, right, like you walk into a room and you're like, that's a weird energy, I don't know what's coming up, but there's
Mm-hmm.
something here. And it's like as a psilocybin facilitator and like in that work, it's like my job is to really attune to these energy fields and like to be very aware while also recognizing that like it's not mine to carry, it is mine to keep safe. If that like whatever's coming up in this space isn't
Yeah.
mine necessarily, but it is like my responsibility to like create this container where this person can have like this experience. But yeah, it is curious. Like in psilocybin journeys, I've had a lot of interesting things happen, right? Like where, you know, it is, psilocybin is what we call a non-specific amplifier. So like it heightens your senses.
Okay.
So all of your senses are heightened, including like that sixth sense kind of energy sense. So, people can attune and kind of know things without there being like a verbal like
Mm-hmm.
um, transfer, right? Like
Yeah.
you just kind of know. Hmm.
Yeah. Oh, I've seen it.
Yeah, you're right. You're
It's
like, I've seen
bizarre.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is. It is really interesting. It's just like it's so fascinating. The human brain and energy and humans in general, we're very curious creatures, and I think we're
Mm-hmm.
just at the beginning stages because again, like research on psychedelics in general has been limited over the last 50 years. So, um, and now like I'm excited to see as more research starts and grows to see what we learn just about consciousness, right?
Yeah.
About what it is to be human. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. When you're having a therapy session with somebody who's on
Hmm.
psilocybin, are you
Yeah.
are you coaching them through the journey? Are you asking them questions? Are you picking up on things they're doing or saying and getting them to dig in? Or you know what's your role and how effective is that? I mean, is everybody kind of receptive, or does some people just they're just it's like you're not there? Is everybody just
Yeah.
different?
That's a good question. The role of a facilitator during the session. So like our programs at Bendable are designed to be are designed to be therapeutic programs. So they're very comprehensive, and this is different than the Oregon model itself. So like our programs put a huge emphasis on preparation and integration. So the before and after of a psilocybin session.
Okay.
So most of the work that we're doing that is like what you would maybe, you know, the more of the questions, the probing, the getting to know you, the like diving into things is done in the preparation work.
Okay.
Largely, the psilocybin session itself is non-directive, and this is similar to like what Johns Hopkins is doing with their clinical trials and like these different like research. Like that really is a time. It's a non-directive experience. So it's, and all that say is that we're trying not to impose ourselves into the experience, but rather allowing the experience to unfold. And that's why I would say like I'm ground control, you're a space explorer.
Mm-hmm.
So my job there is mostly to, build on the rapport and the relationship that we've built on in preparation so that the subconscious and all of the parts of us feel really safe in that space to like let go and allow like to whatever needs to come out or come up. And so my role there is oftentimes it can look like deep meditation. I'm usually sitting right next to the person and attuning to them. They have their eye shades on. There's a playlist that is playing, but I'm there to support. And is what I do during that process is I take notes. If I notice things, I will, like if they say something like, "Oh, write this down," I need to write this down. Sometimes there will be some dialogue, but that's client driven. Like if a client's like asking like, but if I ask a direct question of like, "Oh, I'm having this experience of X, Y, and Z. What do you think it means?" And I always like say, now is not the time for meaning making. That's our work of integration. Right now, it's just a fact finding mission. Like all
Yeah.
your job is just to go and like explore and feel and like bring all of that information back, and we're going to unpack it later. Like
Okay.
now is not the time.
And
So
can you get
mhm,
the questions going beforehand to just kind of set the scene and then help them, what they may have brought up or something within the journey, or does it
mhm.
just happen? Whatever happens, and you can't really design it.
Yeah, so I would say that yes, a lot of the questions that we're asking beforehand, intention setting, are like guiding us.
Okay.
So I know that you've never, physically had a baby, but
Yep.
like it's a lot like birth. Like so
Okay.
oftentimes, so I actually facilitated for a doula recently, and she was like, "This is exactly like birth," because it's like you're making the best plans possible. Like
Right.
you're talking about things, you're like noticing things, you're working within a set of framework of like here's some tool and here's the questions, but like ultimately like you have a birth plan, but it doesn't always go the way you
Hmm.
planned, like right.
Right.
And so it's like kind of the same thing. Like we plan, we set intentions, we have questions that we may be asking or that we're curious about, but at the end of the day we don't get to decide what the psilocybin session exactly looks like,
Yeah.
right?
Well, that
Like it
probably
will
helps.
unfold.
Yeah, that probably helps
Yeah,
some of the fear of the patient to
yeah,
to have the plan, to set the to
yeah,
kind of set all of that stuff, so at least you kind of know what to expect.
yeah,
I can imagine that help alleviate some stress of it, because
absolutely.
I've like I said, I've never done it, but it is kind of scary to me, even though I really want to try it.
Hmm.
It does have that like whoa, and a lot of it's because there's so much just falsities out there about it as well. So you kind of you don't know what to think. So I think having kind
Yeah.
of that scene setting, like you said, would really take away some of that, some of the fear from it.
And absolutely. I mean, I think I have such a huge reverence for the clients that I serve because it takes so much courage and vulnerability to show up to a psilocybin session and like allow yourself to truly like let go and be like, when you're saying like, "Hey, we are going to set such a solid base and we're here together and I have like the clinical tools and whatnot to like keep you safe." But on the other hand, like I don't know what's going to happen this session. And you just
Mm-hmm.
have to trust yourself because you are strong enough to go through this. We can face together whatever comes up, but like you have to believe that because and it's scary, right? When you're like, I don't know exactly know what's going to happen. And people are like, am I going to, relive all this trauma? Like, am I going to cry for 6 straight hours? And I'm like, yeah, maybe, because that both of those things have happened, right? Like people do like have, the experience of rebirth, of the experience of death. Like they go through
Mm-hmm.
past traumas, but like they they process deep grief, like there's also like I don't want to say like it's all like these hardships, like there's also really beautiful moments and like some people relate this to like one of the most impactful experiences of their life, like and much like childbirth, like and people will say like oh, this was up there with like the birth of my child, and it's like yeah, absolutely, like which is such a powerful experience. childbirth is challenging, but it's also so beautiful, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I think like a psilocybin session is very similar to that. It's like there are moments of beautiful joy, and people experience like deep, deep love, and like, sometimes there's these experiences of like meeting a creator, or tapping into like the collective consciousness, as we call that. And that's like such a sacred place. And so to be in that space and to witness it is so powerful. And there can be really challenging pieces. And, we have our tools to like help people get through it. But again, like our goal is never to get away from it. It's to go through it.
Right.
Right. Like, and that's where the relief is, the healing is on the other side. And so, but it can be tricky. Oftentimes I'll hear people be like, I will never do it again. I'm so thankful. I'm so grateful that I came, and never again. Right.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine that the more you do it, the because you expect, now you kind of have an idea of what to expect, that you'd almost get more out of it the more you do it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's wrong, but I feel like maybe if you're more used to it, you kind of know, okay, this is what's going to happen, and then how to process some of it a little. Because the first time you're probably like,
Mm-hmm.
whoa, just mind blown, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, is that something that people experience, that the more they come back, the more that they get out of it, or do they hit a point? Because I've also heard that with ayahuasca, with a lot of people, hey, maybe the first time didn't work, maybe the second time, sometimes it's the first time and you're like, I'm done, like all my trauma's healed and whatever. But sometimes it takes 3 times, and then all of a sudden you feel fantastic. You don't want to kill yourself anymore. All of those
Yeah.
feelings have washed away. So I guess, how many sessions have you seen? Like maybe, is it like one does a body good, or is it sometimes take 10? I mean, have you seen the spectrum of that?
Yeah. So typically for us, like, I've done over 200 psilocybin sessions, and I would say less than 10% of clients have come back for it, or have needed or come back for a second session.
Wow.
And
Okay.
typically is what we see. And again, one session is plenty. And again, like I said, like for myself, we've got decades between experiences, and where I stand right now, I'm like, I don't know if there'll come another time. There may, when I think another therapeutic journey is warranted, or there's something else that comes up into my life, but it's not something like I'm planning on now. I think there's, sometimes folks get really into wanting the medicine to be the answer.
Right.
And it's just not the case. It's like oftentimes these sessions can provide you with enough information and insight that like, then that's your job, right? So to go and integrate that, what we call integration of making meaning of that, of integrating the lessons and what you learned into everyday life. The goal is to not need the medicine further. It's like,
Yeah.
we want to, this is a tool. It's not an answer. And so, and so for the folks who do typically need, and I use the word need in quotes, but who may be more, may benefit more from 2 sessions. Oftentimes we will do 2 sessions with our combat veterans.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that can be a really helpful process. And then folks with really rigid patterns of thinking, and this often is like OCD, disordered eating, specifically like anorexia nervosa, and places like that, where you see like these really rigid patterns, because psilocybin is a curious thing in the brain. From a neuroscience standpoint, our brains get into, as we age, just in general, our brains get kind of into ruts. And like the technical term for this is canalization. So, as our brains get into ruts, and people will say like, oh, I would like to get out of this pattern, but I don't know how. Addiction's another place where sometimes 2 sessions are warranted, because it's just a tough pattern to break in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And psilocybin is such a cool thing, because when it comes into our system, so there's like the one side of the coin, which is these ineffable experiences of the psilocybin session itself. But from like a neuroscience standpoint, on the other side of the coin is this increased neuroplasticity. So basically you're growing a ton of new neural pathways after a psilocybin session, where brains return to a highly neuroplastic state for about 32 days. It doesn't just like drop off at the end, it like tapers down.
Mm-hmm.
But like those new neural pathways, that huge amount of growth, what we do with that really matters. So for folks who have like really rigid patterns of thinking, or like some deep complex trauma, like those 2 sessions can be helpful, again, to just kind of break down the old patterns and to like allow for this growth of the new neural pathways to develop new patterns.
Yeah. When when sorry, I'm trying to process all of this
Yeah.
stuff. When somebody takes it, um, what's the onset like? Is it something that takes a while? Is it immediate, or is it just kind of all of a sudden you realize you're in the middle of it?
Yeah.
Gradual.
Good question. So typically, they're like a psilocybin session has an arc, a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Okay.
Typically, these sessions last anywhere from 6 to 8 hours, um, and it is really just person dependent. It doesn't. It's not. It's just the way that it is. But in between 6 and 8 hours,
Okay.
and so the beginning is where you'll start to feel like what we said, like the onset of like medicine, where you'll start to feel like, oh, there's a shift in my body, like, and people feel that in different ways, like tingling, a warmness. You just start to realize that there's a change there.
Yeah.
So you'll start to notice that at about 20 to 40 minutes into a session. And then from there, you're at like peak experience at about an hour. And then you spend about 2.5 to 3 hours, like in what we call the peak experience, which is just where you're really deep in that subconscious, just oftentimes this is where, some of the really big processing can come along, and every session is different. Like I've seen people who have laid perfectly still for 6 to 8 hours and they come out of like, I felt like I was gone forever, but they like had this really intense experience, but they like never moved.
Wow.
And I've worked with other people that are very somatic, so there may be a lot of like movement and like on the body. You may see some agitation and different things. So like everybody is different, and then in between, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the peak experience is in that after the hour of the come up, and then 2.5 to 3 hours at the peak, and then you start to come back down or land, as I say. And so that, and again, it's just like a slow taper down, and then in about 5.5, 6 hours, like you start to return to yourself. You're like, oh, okay, like, and it's not that you don't have access to yourself during that process, because you are very aware. Like if I tell somebody, hey, I need you to focus, they're like, oh, okay, like you're still you, and like people still have access to like knowing that they need water, going to the bathroom, like you're still have access to your faculties and who you are. And when you lay back and put the eye shades on, like you can go into these very deep kind of like it's similar. It mimics like those deep meditations in like a brain scan, right?
Mm-hmm. So you're with these people for 6 to 8 hours.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That has to be pretty impactful and, pretty draining on you just to go through those sessions with people. Obviously they're a little bit more, but I feel like that would be quite an event for you as well, just as the facilitator.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is. It's I don't find it draining necessarily, but I do find myself to be tired afterwards. Like I definitely like need my own nap. Like, and it's interesting because it's like most of the day would be, if you were just like an outside observer, you'd be like, but you just sat there. And I'm like, energetically though, it was different. And like, some sessions are, require a bit more involvement. But yeah, I think, but it is also just such an incredible gift. Like I feel so fortunate to be able to witness folks in these spaces and to hold that space and to be a trusted person. It's not something I take lightly. It's just such a great honor.
Yeah.
And, as, a mental health professional who does, regular talk therapy as well, it is really special to watch people come through a psilocybin program and to watch changes happen so quickly.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's like, whoa, because you can see a client in regular talk therapy for years, and then you're like, we're making progress. And then with a psilocybin session, it's like a matter of weeks. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like you've really changed so many things, right? Like just like people are, getting parts of their life back. They're getting alleviation from like depression that has been so long lasting. They're getting space from their trauma. Like I think one of my veteran clients at the beginning, like she was one of our first clients, but she had said after her psilocybin session, she was like, I didn't realize I was carrying a bag of rocks, and now that it's off my back, she's like, I just feel so much lighter. And like the bounce in her step, like was just so incredible. It was like from a somatic like experience, it was like watching a different person, just this person who was lighter and happier and more buoyant and like just coming through this of being like it was like her body truly had released the trauma.
Yeah. And when you're like you had already mentioned, a lot of veterans. So
Yeah.
I actually used to be in law enforcement. So one of
Okay.
the things that I noticed, and again, veterans, it's not so much as the people that are in or the active duty law enforcement as well, but when you leave, that's kind of when it hits you because you don't really
Yeah.
realize it. And that's what I've tried to explain it, and I get a lot of my therapy from like writing. So I've started writing a lot, but, I kind of describe it as kind of like death by a thousand cuts, especially,
Mm-hmm.
if you're in the, deployed, if you're, a cop and you're working every day, every single day you're seeing somebody's worst day. You're seeing a lot of trauma, a lot of dead people, a lot of kids, and it's just these
Yeah.
little tiny cuts that just get you, get you, get you, get you, get you. But you wake up, you go back, you do it again. So you're always in it. So you never realize how much you're wounded until you leave. And then all of those
Mm-hmm.
cuts start to sting and heal. And that's kind of where I see, the veterans, they leave, law enforcement, military, they lose the mission, but it's also just kind of everything hits you because all of a sudden you're not in it every day and you've taken a step away and now you're like, whoa, and you have all these things to think about, all these things you never really thought about before. And so is that kind of where the healing comes? It's just allowing you to process that stuff and then just have some of those therapy sessions around it. I guess like what's the main thing that helps the healing?
Yeah, I think that this is a really curious thing that I think we're all trying to figure out what exactly is the mechanism of action. Where, and, so this is interesting. I love this question because it's just something that I love noodling on. Um, because part of it is, okay, well, we do know what's like actually occurring in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Like we understand kind of the, we're starting to understand like the neuroscience behind again these like mechanisms of action, whether it's like through, because psilocybin, it works by disrupting like rigid patterns in the brain as we talked about and creating a state of openness, so both during and after the experience, so that can lead to emotional breakthroughs, cognitive reframing, and symptom relief, especially when supported with like these programs that provide like extensive preparation and integration. And so I think like it's four reasons. Like, so there's the serotonin system that gets activated, the brain network reorganization, and this emotional release and insight. And then like we talked about the post-session neuroplasticity. So like allowing people like once they do have this like emotional release and insight and like they're seeing things from a different way, then they're like what they're able to do afterwards of like, okay, I can change my relationship to these traumas,
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing
if
I'd
that makes
say.
sense.
Yeah, because you become really good at compartmentalizing it all,
Right.
and you don't,
Mm-hmm.
you don't really think about it or talk about it. Um,
Yeah.
Even though
It,
everybody would be fine to talk about it, it's just kind of something you don't do. But a lot
but
of
it's
people,
also hard, right?
yeah,
There's a lot of like shame or like and these emotions that we've compartmentalized, we compartmentalize them for a reason, right? They were hard to deal with. They were awful things to see, right? They were awful things to experience. Like knowing, especially like first responders and law enforcement and veterans, it's like you faced up against the really dark parts of the world, right?
mm-hmm,
And like and that can be, and on a regular basis that can be really challenging to just continue to hold. And there's this, stoicism that is associated with folks in these fields to just be like, I can do this, right? Like people who have been in service for so long, who have given so much, and it's like, where is the safe place to set that down? Where is the safe place to process that?
yeah,
And like, giving, so sometimes like these, or at least this is what I see with our programs, it's like that space to truly like, one, get it out of the body, right? To just like, just get it out of the body. And like I mean, again, I go back to the book, The Body Keeps the Score, but it is like such a fascinating, you know, book where it talks about how trauma gets stored in our body and how that trauma then like comes out in these really interesting ways that we didn't necessarily even know that those dots were connected. And so how people find their healing to, whether that's through writing, art therapy, talk therapy, psilocybin therapy, and like I think like a combination of all of it to like to return to ourselves, to allow us to, one, forgive ourselves for things that maybe had transpired, to forgive others, and to feel ourselves as truly connected to one another, to like feel that like love and hope and light that comes into our bodies through these psilocybin sessions as well.
Yeah. Are most of the people that you work with local, or do people come up from all over the country, the world?
They come from all over the world. I mean, mostly I would say country, but we've had folks who have come from, Europe, from Canada, Mexico, Australia. Like, we've had folks who have come from all over the place.
Yeah.
We do serve, a lot of people in the local community as well. But like Oregon is the only place, I mean, Colorado now, but Colorado is just now getting their facility set up. So I think the first one just opened like this month, I believe. So, Oregon is really the only place where you can access these services in a safe and regulated way. And like, and I, as much, and I know I say this with like, I've accessed my own care in what we would call underground, market, and because it wasn't, available in a regulated space. But I deeply believe now in that we have this of like the regulated space really does allow people, to access this. It is so important for people to have regulated access because, we are governed by the Oregon Health Authority. I have an
Yeah.
official license. Like if something, you have a place where you can, get information and resources. I'm held accountable by a state agency, right? So I think that like it gives people a lot of peace of mind to know that these programs are, in the regulated space. Also, like I have a website. My business is advertised. I've got a cute little sign. Like you can, drive by. Like this isn't like in
Yeah.
a hush hush, like, oh, I don't know where you're going.
It's not in
And
the
I think
alley somewhere. Yeah.
right. And I think for our veterans who the only place for them to, and, to access this kind of care was in foreign countries
Hmm.
previously. And so for a lot of people who did, who came from these backgrounds like yours, like I don't feel comfortable in unregulated, illegal space, right? I don't want to do that. So like having these regulated marks is just like so helpful for people to like, again, feel just, I'm a middle-aged mom. So it's like, you're like, oh, okay. Like she's just a mental health professional.
Right. So
Like feels a little safer.
yeah, and I know, I think you kind of touched on this, but it doesn't sound like insurance covers something like this. Not yet, anyway.
No, well, this is exciting. We just actually issued a press release this week is that so bendable therapy is the first place in the country to be able to provide um, to that is taking private insurance. So we have one
Wow.
provider who has signed on. So Anthea. So Anthea is a national insurance provider. So anybody with Anthea insurance in the country now has access to fully covered psilocybin services through bendable therapy, which
Wow.
is pretty cool. So we're working really hard because I mean, again, like we've provided scholarships, we've provided a lot, and like again, access is not only like eliminating financial barriers, but also like regulatory markets are access as we just spoke about. But I think that the big next big hurdle that Bendable really sees as one of our priorities is like, how do we encourage other private insurance companies to come alongside and recognize that these sort of therapy and modality belong alongside other reimbursable treatment modalities because, the research is there, the clinical trials are so promising. We're about to release our data from our research project, and it's like these treatments are effective at treating certain mental health conditions, and when done properly and held in these spaces of regulated markets where there's professional guidance and support at every step of the way, like people can achieve pretty incredible outcomes. And so we're excited to continue to move that forward. One down. I don't even know how many more to go, but we're going to keep working at it.
Yeah, I love it. You guys are doing some great work. And like you said, it's a tool, not an answer, right? Tools do work. They help you do your
Yeah.
work. So if
Yeah.
someone was to do a little bit more research, where would they find the studies that you've been working on? That one that's coming out here in June. It sounded like maybe there was another one as well. Where can people kind of do their homework on that?
Yeah, so there's several different, like the clinical trial stuff, and was predominantly done through Johns Hopkins, so people can always go look at their stuff. But for us, bendabletherapy.org, there's a tab on there that several of our programs. You can see our
Oh,
facilitators,
oh, you there? I
and just kind
lost
of
you.
learn.
Sorry, I lost you just for a second. I heard bendabletherapy.org, and then it kind of went garbled. Sorry.
Oh, okay. No problem. Yeah. So bendabletherapy.org is where folks can learn about like our research project, meet our facilitators, learn about our programs.
Okay.
And there's just a lot of information and resources on there about psychedelic assisted therapy, in general, and then like our program specifically.
Great. And then how about you? Where can people follow you? Do you do, I think your email had a LinkedIn. Are you pretty active on there? Or are you a lot of Instagram or?
I've got LinkedIn and that's it. I have no other
Okay.
social media.
All right. Hey, that's great though. 'Cause I'll tag some of
Yeah.
this in the show notes as well,
Okay.
so that people can,
Okay.
if people are interested, they can go in and actually, take a peek at your site and connect with you there. So
Perfect.
awesome. Well,
Yeah.
I feel like I've learned a lot about about psilocybin therapy for sure, and
Yeah.
it's intrigued me even more. And it is a pretty deep topic, and there's a lot to cover.
hmm
But is there anything that we didn't discuss that you wanted to share about it or about your clinic?
I I don't think so. I think we pretty much covered all the bases. Yeah. It's an exciting new frontier, and I'm grateful to be one of the folks who are involved in this work. So,
Yeah, absolutely. You guys must be really good at those spreadsheets because you're breaking a lot of ground. So
yeah,
yeah, well,
one of these days I'll keep saying I'm no new projects, just right around the corner. But I just can't help myself. And
yeah,
it's interesting work, and I feel like it's really important.
yeah. Oh, I think.
Like with the issue. Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
no, that's
I don't
okay.
know what's going on.
Yeah, I don't know. For some reason, just right now, I just keep losing you just briefly. But yeah, very interesting work. And then you said something else after that.
Oh, I was just saying, it's I get swept away with it because it is so fascinating and I love it so much. And I think it's just important, being one of the early adopters of this to, continue to move it forward and make it accessible for more folks and to, have these conversations around safety and advocacy and how do we help folks do this work appropriately,
Hmm.
and with integrity. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, you're changing lives, but I have no doubt you're saving them as well. So it's important work, and it's been great to talk with you. I really appreciate
Yeah.
the conversation, and I'll leave it at that for now, and I'll let you know
All
when
right.
this episode is live. Okay.
I'm so excited. Thank you so much for like having me on the show, and I will look forward to hearing it when it comes out.
Great. Absolutely. Well, again, thanks again, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Bye.
Bye.
And there you have it, Amanda Gow. I want to thank Amanda for coming on the show and sharing personal details about her life, as well as educating us on the topic of psilocybin and psychedelic assisted therapy. I love recording these conversations and always learn so much along the way about these interesting topics. I'm looking forward to learning more from you about other topics, so make sure you sign up to be my next guest and we can hit record on your life and share your story. Head over to strangerconversationspodcast.com, linked in the show notes, and sign up. Don't forget to leave the show a review so we can get in front of even more listeners. Also, don't forget to like, follow, share, and subscribe so you don't miss out on the conversations to come. And don't forget to follow me at Real Tay Jones on your favorite social media platform. I'm Tay Jones. Thank you for listening, and we'll chat later.